Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Fiona Hanlon, and I'm the Events Communications Executive at Compliance Institute. So thanks for joining our session, Navigating the Ethical Frontier. It's great to have close to 300 registered for today's webinar, which is excellent. And a very big welcome to our members from IFCA and EMFCO who are also joining us today. So just before we start, just a bit of housekeeping. So the session will run for approximately 1 hour, and we will leave time at the end for Q&A. So please ensure to submit your questions there for the Q&A session at the end. The CPD code for today is 2026-1124, and that will be sent to everybody once the session concludes, along with a PDF of the slides. And we will also upload the recording to our library section, and it will also be available on CPD On Demand. So I'll hand you over to our moderator today, Coleman Hudson, Chief Risk Officer at Howden Ireland and Chair of Compliance Institute's Ethics Committee. Thank you, Coleman.
Thank you, Fiona. So look, I'm thrilled today on behalf of the Ethics Committee of the Compliance Institute to be able to arrange this event. I think over the last number of years, technology shifted from a supporting role in financial services to something that fundamentally shapes how firms operate and make decisions. AI has accelerated that shift more quickly and more visibly than almost any other development. For risk and compliance leaders, this creates a different type of challenge. It's no longer about adoption, but about maintaining judgment, accountability, and trust as decision-making becomes more automated and more complex. Today's session, I guess, is somewhat an opportunity to pause and reflect, to consider what responsible oversight looks like when new capabilities outpace familiar rule books. I think we're really fortunate today to have Marie Toft, who's deep experience in this space, who'll help ground the discussion with practical insight and explore the risk and compliance professionals, the role that risk and compliance professionals play in shaping outcomes, not just responding to them. Marie is a well-recognized voice in the field of technology, ethics, and responsible innovation. Marie works closely with organizations today, and she'll touch on this, navigating real-world implications of AI, particularly where governance, accountability, and sometimes maybe public trust intersect. Maria has also worked on the engineering of AI in terms of emotional intelligence with Emotionize. So I think Maria is uniquely placed to deliver today's session. So what we'll do is I'll hand over to Maria now, and if people want to give me questions through the Q&A or through your email, I'll pass them on at the end of the session. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you, Coleman. Thank you for such a warm introduction, and good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for making the time. I was really heartened by Fiona's telling me how many of you have decided to join us today. So I'm literally going to jump straight in. I have lots of slides, which, as Fiona mentioned, will all be shared with you straight after this webinar. So let's quickly jump in. So navigating the ethical frontier, AI transformation for compliance leaders. As Coleman mentioned, I'm delighted we've set aside 10 minutes at the end for questions. 2 have already come in. So please feel free to put them in the chat. And even what I'm also interested in, if you get an opportunity, is even your own experiences with AI so far. Where is your organization? How are you finding it? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are your fears? What are your concerns? All of that, I'd be very interested in finding out more. So as Coleman mentioned, just to give you a little bit of background on myself. So I am with a company called ThoughtFox AI Transformation. We work with large companies and smaller companies as well to help them with their AI transformation, which I'll be talking about shortly. I'm also an adjunct professor with Trinity College, lecturing in responsible AI governance and compliance. And so basically, I saw AI back in 2020. So in June 2020, OpenAI released GPT-3, which was the forerunner of ChatGPT. I saw it and I founded Emotionize AI, and we were one of the first startups in Ireland to start working with OpenAI in September 2021, well over a year before ChatGPT was released. Before that, my background, believe it or not, was in television, and I was an executive producer for RTE, and I left RTE in 2017 and set up Emotionize originally as a content creation company. But then I saw AI and I realized that what was about to happen. But I had also returned to university and I'd trained in psychotherapy, hence the whole training AI to be emotionally intelligent. And that's what we've done at Emotionize AI for solutions for both computer for customer support and employee engagement. So one of the areas I'm also very interested in AI, and where I work with ThoughtFox as well as the compliance, is in human-centric AI and the psychology of adoption, because AI is a human transformation, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. It's also quite an emotional topic, and I myself have conflicted feelings about AI. It's a strange one, artificial intelligence. It allows you to hold two feelings at the same time, which is you may be absolutely so impressed and excited about its capabilities, but from a wider societal point of view, no one really knows what the direction of travel is. No one knows what the end game is here. We have never made a technology that is potentially more intelligent than ourselves. And certainly as a parent, and as a parent with a daughter doing Leaving Cert this year, I'm keeping a very close eye on where AI is taking us, because it is, without a doubt, probably the most disruptive revolution we will ever witness. And by the end of this decade, certainly, there's going to be an awful lot of changes in how we work. So the agenda today, we're going to look at how AI is transforming financial services. There are actually 4 waves of it. Then we're going to look at risk, compliance, governance, and ethics, which is the bulk of this webinar. And then finally, we're going to look at how to implement AI in a safe and ethical way. So if we look at the first part, so first of all, AI is already reshaping financial services. We are not in an experimental phase anymore. We are now in a production phase. So as you can see, the conversation has shifted from should we adopt AI to how do we govern autonomous AI at scale? That's the question we're having now. You can see some of the statistics there, up to 85% adoption in financial institutions, 78% on revenue focus. Really interesting for all of this audience, 40% plus risk detection, more suspicious activity detected. And now we look at agentic AI. And this is an interesting statistics from McKinsey last year, but 12% return on investment is a primary driver. So the big debate has been, and you can see it all the time, where is the return on investment on AI? It's a question that we at ThoughtFox are engaging with all the time. There is a massive return on investment on AI. JP Morgan, I think, has invested 2 billion in AI. They've already recouped it. Certainly in financial services, we're seeing huge returns on AI. But the interesting thing about ROI is it's not just on the bottom line, it's on efficiency, it's on productivity. And at this stage, the question is, however you may feel conflicted about AI, no financial services organization is in a position to ignore it. That's really where we are. The train has left the station. Your competitors are already engaging. So the question is, how do you do it safely and ethically? So the 4 ways of AI transformation for financial services: efficiency, intelligence, Gen AI, which is what the buzzword was, which is the world did change in November 2022 when ChatGPT was released, and we saw generative AI. And then this year, of course, agentic AI. Last year was supposed to be the year of agentic AI. This is the year of agentic AI. Last year, people were still trying to get their heads around generative AI. So let's very quickly, again, you will have these slides, so I'm going to move quickly, to go back and peruse yourselves. But this is, first of all, the first automation really, or the first wave. So know your customer and customer onboarding, identity verification, document extraction. So JP Morgan reporting an 80% reduction in onboarding processing time. Regulatory reporting, automated extraction and compilation of regulatory data, so suspicious activity reports. This is the extraordinary thing where AI can actually help you monitor AI. Document processing, IDP, AI is incredibly good at this, reading contracts, policy documents, claims forms, extracting key data points with 95% plus accuracy. And of course, we're all familiar as consumers with customer service chatbots, handling routine inquiries on account balances, claim status, and so on. The next wave then is intelligence with smarter decision. Where it's having a huge impact is fraud detection. So machine learning models analyzing transaction patterns in real time and detecting suspicious behaviors. So now it's actually, it's AI driven, is up to 40% better at detecting more suspicious activity than traditional approaches. Credit scoring and risk modeling, this is something we're going to really come back to. It does incorporate alternative data sources, transaction history, behavior patterns to build richer risk profiles. It improves accuracy, but of course it raises very ethical questions about explainability and bias. And we're going to talk about that. One of the really fascinating things about AI and one of the dangerous things about AI is it's stripped way ahead of the legislation, which we'll come to now. And the question you have to ask yourself with AI is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. If it feels unethical and it feels like you maybe shouldn't be doing this, but that should raise an alarm bell straight away. It is capable of the most extraordinary things, but it doesn't always mean you should do them. Algorithmic trading, AI-driven strategies now account for a significant share of market activity, and predictive compliance. AI systems predict which transactions, clients, or process are most likely to trigger compliance issues. So then generative AI, the big buzzword of last year, certainly in the last couple of years. This is where it does what it says on the tin. It generates new content, it analyzes unstructured data, and it raises new but of course it raises new regulatory questions for people like you. So automated compliance reporting, large language models, you'll hear the term LLM a lot. That's large language models. They can draft regulatory reports, they can summarize policy changes and generate board-ready compliance, cutting report preparation time by 60%. But every output needs human review, and that's a big thing we'll be talking about shortly. Synthetic data, Gen AI can create realistic but artificial data sets for model testing and validation, solving the challenge of using real customer data in development environments while maintaining privacy. Now, the thing about synthetic data, I have my own experiences of data and using synthetic data. As Coleman said, I've run an AI engineering team for the last 5 years, and we generate our own emotionally intelligent data to train our model. So I have a lot of experience of using synthetic data, and you need to be very careful. Sometimes you don't necessarily get the same results. Hyper-personalized advisory, AI generates tailored financial advice and product recommendations based on ICPs, which is incredibly powerful. And then natural language policy analysis, AI reads and interprets regulatory text, flags relevant changes, and maps new requirements to existing controls. And now finally, agentic AI. You're all probably hearing about agentic AI. And if you're familiar with AI, as you know, just even since January, it's just absolutely incredible how quickly the landscape has changed, just even in the last few months. Things that were simply not, we couldn't do even in November, December, we can now. So all of you are probably using different LLMs. So the most famous LLM is OpenAI's LLM ChatGPT. Then, of course, you have Google's Gemini, you have Microsoft's Copilot, and you have Claude. Claude is by a company called Anthropic, and they have really come to the fore since October, particularly. I'm now a complete Claude convert. I use Claude all the time, pretty much. My two preferred large language models would be Claude and Gemini, but everyone has their own preferences, and each of them are better at some things than others. But they all really do pretty much the same thing. But Claude has really, really made very, very quick ground in autonomous AI and agentic AI. And it has this incredible system called OpenClaw that you may be reading an awful lot about. Some of you may be already using agentic AI, but these are the big sobering statistics around agentic AI. So in 2024, we had Gen AI chatbots. Now we have autonomous AI agents. So AI initiating payments, executing compliance decisions, and managing portfolios autonomously. So this is the brave new world that we now literally find ourselves in. But the big problem is, which is what we're going to move on to now, is this governance gap. So these are the sobering statistics, basically, that 1 in 3 organizations have only 1 in 3 organizations, or less than 1 in 3, have adequate governance and controls for autonomous AI agents. So if you're letting AI agents run in your organization and you have no proper oversight on them, you're in a very, very, very risky situation. So what does this mean for people like you? AI agents can act and do act without human approval. Accountability for autonomous decisions is unclear, which we'll talk about now. Existing governance frameworks were not designed for agentic AI. Coleman and I were talking about this just before we came on. Things are moving so quickly that, you You don't know what you don't know. Agentic AI is a very, very new phenomenon. You've been dealing with a different compliance and risk world, so you have to get yourself up to speed on where this is and create new governance frameworks, which is what we're going to talk about. But really, I think, really, when you look at agentic AI, it is the most urgent ethical frontier for compliance leaders, is AI that can act autonomously. So let's look at what we need to do to put manners and guardrails around all of this incredible power that we find ourselves with, because it is that age-old phrase, with great power comes great responsibility, and that's your job as compliance and risk officers within your organizations. So let's just absolutely identify what are the ethical AI risks for compliance officers. So the first one is the one that it gets a lot of attention, and rightly so: hallucinations and errors. AI systems generate confident but sometimes factually incorrect outputs. In financial services, this means wrong regulatory interpretations, inaccurate customer advice, or flawed compliance reports. A hallucinating AI that drafts an SAR with fabricated transaction details is a serious regulatory risk. Now, this is a very, very real risk, and I'm sure all of you have encountered it. And one of the things about AI that I find fascinating is it gives very, very plausible hallucinations. The hallucinations are very similar to the truth. And if you don't know what you're talking about, and that's where all of you come in, you can see why you can be persuaded that this is factually correct. Bias and discrimination. Biased training data leads to discriminatory lending decisions, insurance pricing, or credit scoring. If an AI denies a mortgage application based on postcode patterns that correlate with ethnicity, that is a direct breach of consumer protection and equality law. So these models are biased. Okay, many of them are biased. There are ways of alleviating that. There are ways of monitoring that, which I can tell you about, but many of them are biased. But there are ways of reducing that risk. Data privacy and PII. So large language models can inadvertently memorize and expose personal data from training sets. Staff entering customer data into AI tools risk leakage. Protecting personal data in the age of AI requires governance protocols well beyond traditional GDPR controls. So the point is about GDPR has gone nowhere. The risks have just suddenly got higher. All right. One of the biggest risks we see here, and I'll come on to it, is of course people putting sensitive information and PII into free AI models. That is a definite no-no, which we're going to talk about now. Then explainability, the black box problem. Can you explain a rejected loan application to the regulator? Many AI operators or models operate as black boxes where even their developers can't fully explain how a decision was reached. The EU AI Act and the Central Bank of Ireland both require that AI decisions affecting consumers are explainable and auditable. The computer says no is not an acceptable answer. And this is actually in force now under the CBI, which we'll talk about. And then finally, shadow AI. This is a very, very real problem. We're discovering it with our work in ThoughtFox across all organizations. So employees across your organization are already using AI tools. And don't be in any doubt that they're not. They're using ChatGPT, Copilot, and Gemini with company data without authorization or oversight. So this creates compliance blind spots, data leakage risks, and potential regulatory breaches. Shadow AI is the compliance officer's blind spot, and it is growing every day. It is naive to believe that your employees who are not given official enterprise AI tools are not using AI to help them in their daily tasks, because why wouldn't you? And that's your shadow AI right there. So this is something compliance officers have to start getting to grips with. This is one of the single biggest risks that we see in organizations, particularly those in the early stages of their AI transformation. If they haven't really engaged, there is definitely a shadow AI world operating in your organization. So the EU AI Act, what you need to know. So first of all, it's a really interesting piece of legislation. The EU is the first large economic bloc in the world to regulate for AI. It has been in train since 2018. And a lot of this is because of the legacy of social media. So we all, 25 years ago, thought social media was this lovely benign force that helped us keep in touch with our friends, when in Australia or America. And now, 25 years later, we've woken up to discover it's undermining our democracy and creating a mental health crisis amongst our children. So the EU said, this is not happening again on our watch. We're all over AI. And so it is the first economic bloc to ever legislate for AI. It is in force now, and we'll talk about that straight away. As you can see, since February of last year, AI literacy has been in force. Now, so many organizations are not aware of this. If you have any employees in your organization using an AI model, that could be an LLM, as we've described. It could be a HR model that has AI in it. It could be a finance model that has AI in it. You are legally obliged to basically give them literacy training. It is a legal requirement. I would also argue it is a compliance requirement. This is not just ticking a legal box. If you don't provide the training and you don't provide the guidance and the understanding of how to use these incredibly powerful models, you are putting your organization at risk. This has been in force since February of 25. Actual enforcement is happening in August this year. So from August this year, the law will be actually enforced. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Since August as well, general purpose AI and prohibited practice, that came into force. Now, this is an interesting one. So the EU is under pressure to pull back on its legislation, particularly from the huge tech companies in America, a lot of which obviously have their European headquarters here in Ireland. America and legislation on AI is, I will use the word SHIT show, frankly, it's unbelievable. There were certain guardrails and kind of rules under the Biden administration. They were all taken away under the Trump administration. And now you're looking at an absolute very complicated landscape where every single one of the 50 states are legislating for AI themselves. So it is in complete flux, and President Trump now isn't happy with that because he doesn't want any legislation on AI. So he's actually trying to bring it back to a federal level again. So it's in flux. And what, of course, this is doing is it's allowing the tech companies to get ahead, and they're certainly leading the way because, as I said, the legislation is so far behind, and there's no sign of, certainly in America, of that catching up soon. But in Europe, it's completely different. But of course, when you look, the EU is the largest economic bloc in the world, so America and the tech companies are putting pressure on the EU to kind of water down some of this legislation. And what's interesting is that is actually happening. So high risk systems, a lot of which fall into any system financial services are using, that whole deadline for enforcement has now been put back. It looks like it's not confirmed yet, but it is highly likely. It was supposed to be enforced in August of this year. It could be as late as December of next year. However, under the Central Bank of Ireland, a lot of those rules are actually in force right now, which I'll come to. And so full enforcement across all tiers, and I'll talk about those tiers, those risk tiers in a second, is now not expected for quite a while. So you can see there what the fines and the compliance risks are if a company is caught in breach of the EU AI Act. No company wants to be the first to be prosecuted under the EU AI Act. It's a little bit like GDPR, and the fines are significant. So it's just something to be aware of, obviously. So this is how the EU has decided to look at risk and when it comes to AI within organizations. So first of all, you got the unacceptable risk. That legislation is now in force. So social scoring, real-time biometric surveillance, and so on. So obviously, social credit scoring, subliminal manipulation, exploitation of vulnerabilities, that is all utterly and completely banned outright by the EU AI Act. And if you instruct an AI system to do that, you are breaking the law. Now, in high risk, an awful lot of what happens in financial services is in high risk. You can see credit scoring, insurance pricing, fraud detection, AML systems, and investment advice. These are all, the EU has designated all of these high risk systems. So creditworthiness assessment, insurance risk pricing, fraud detection. So if you have any AI operating in your organization that does any of these activities, that is a high risk activity. And you are now subject to very strict obligations if you run these systems, which I'll be outlining now shortly. Then limited risk, you probably have quite a bit of this already. These are the transparency obligations. Users must be told they're interacting with AI, includes chatbots and AI generated content. And finally, minimal risk, spam filters, AI writing assistants, basic analytics dashboards. These are all seen as minimal risk. So let's have a look at what these risk types and classification are. So let's talk about the risk types, first of all, when it comes to AI. So you've got, first of all, the risks built into the AI technology itself. So hallucinations, data quality, bias, algorithmic limitations. These are risks that sit within AI themselves that you need to be aware of and mitigate against. The application risks from how AI is deployed, using a chatbot, financial advice, or credit scoring with biased data. An awful lot of this is down to the user. How are you using AI, or how are you basically training AI with your data, and what application does it have? That's the application risk. And then finally, the compliance risk, which we've spoken about, the Central Bank of Ireland, the EU AI Act. I'll come to the Central Bank of Ireland in a second. But these are the types of risk that your organization is now exposed to. So first of all, the ethical risk. Is it fair? Is it biased? Does it discriminate? And what about human dignity? I mean, there's loads of other ethical risks about AI, and people want, it's really interesting. And I completely understand. I lecture in Trinity College on all of this, and we bring organizations like Workday and Fidelity Investment through AI leadership training, and I train them in governance and ethics and responsible AI. And it becomes quite I lecture for 4. I'm there this week actually, on Thursday and Friday. I lecture for 4 hours in governance and compliance in Trinity on AI, and it can quite often become quite a philosophical and existential conversation. Are we using AI to replace people? Are we using AI to augment people? These are very, very big, deep ethical questions around AI as well. But from a risk point of view, obviously you have an operational risk, system failures, errors, business continuity. You've got the regulatory risk, which we've described. But then we have the risk that I think is possibly the most significant risk, which is reputational. So it's public trust, brand damage, and customer confidence. If AI gets something badly wrong in your organization and it's exposed, and you have spent generations, years and years. I know there are some organizations on this call that go back to not even the 20th century, but the 19th century. And you have this incredible reputation that can be literally gone in 24 hours. As I mentioned, I worked in RTE, and even now, 3 years later, the legacy of the payment scandal is still with RTE. RTE on the Edelman barometer used to score really highly when it came to their trust barometer. It is way down now, and it's going to take quite a while to recover. Reputational damage because of an AI exposure could finish organizations in many ways, particularly organizations like financial services, where the stakes are very, very high. Now, what are your risks or your obligations if you are running a high-risk system in financial services? So the first one is you need a risk management system. You need to establish and maintain a continuous risk management system through the AI lifecycle. You need to identify, analyze, and mitigate the risks and document everything. What you're looking at here with these 4 things, which I'll quickly outline, and I was saying this again to Coleman just before we started, you're about to build a governance ecosystem. That's what you're about to build. If you want to deploy AI in your organization, you now need to build your governance ecosystem. So we're all talking an awful lot about jobs with AI, who will be replaced, and as parents, I'm sure all of you are looking at what's coming down the line. But I'll tell you, a growth area in AI is governance and risk compliance. Okay, so along with the AI drivers and the people who run these systems and get so much out of it, there needs to be a whole governance ecosystem built to manage all of these very, very real risks, as we've just outlined, and quite existential risks. But it can be done, and we go into organizations every week and help them build this ecosystem. That's exactly what we do. And Data governance is interesting. So ensure training, validation, and testing data sets are relevant, representative, and free from errors. Bias detection and mitigation must be documented and ongoing. And of course, I do this every day with my own startup. We literally have tests every week where we test our model to see how it's performing on certain bias and discrimination and so on. Because what's really interesting is not all bias and discrimination is wrong necessarily. So if you train an AI model to, for example, in procurement, to say that we don't want to engage with companies who have, maybe, dodgy child labor policies, that's positive discrimination. Not all discrimination is necessarily wrong. But what's really interesting about these models is they drift. Okay, I know this. I monitor my own model every day, and I help companies monitor the models that they're using. They do drift. They need continuous evaluation. And it's simply just building an ecosystem. It's just building the checks and balances where the model is constantly looked at, so that in the event of a regulatory breach, or if you're audited, you can prove it. You've got the documentation to prove that you set this up. Human oversight. Design AI systems so humans can effectively oversee operation. Compliance officers must understand outputs and be able to override AI decisions when needed. Under the UAI Act, human oversight is an absolute non-negotiable. So these systems need human oversight. You cannot let them run free. One of the best ways, and I really would encourage this, to think about AI now, it is getting better by the week. I know this. When ChatGPT was released, it has been described as being back in 22, like a drunk undergraduate. If you wanted an answer, you'd go to it and see what it said. We're very far away from that. These systems are getting better all the time, but as we all know, they can and do make mistakes. Best way to think about AI is as the smartest intern you have ever had in your life. But you would not let an intern run something or, basically come up with something that you haven't checked. And that is a very, very, very good way of thinking about AI. And then finally, transparency and documentation. You need to maintain technical documentation sufficient to demonstrate compliance, log AI decisions for audit trails, provide clear information about AI capabilities and limitations. So I'm sure you're all looking at this thinking, oh my God, where do we even start? You start the usual. You start slowly. You start, you get one AI system in, you see how it works, you build the compliance. Then you maybe move into HR, you build the compliance. The best, again, another quote that I would always use is that quote by Mark Twain, which is just getting started is getting ahead, but you do need to get started. And if you look at AI transformation through a governance and compliance and ethical and safety lens, well, then you are going to get the most extraordinary benefits safely and ethically from AI. So every new AI application, whether built in-house or bought off the shelves, needs to be interrogated through a safety and ethical lens before deployment. This is not optional. It is the foundation of responsible AI in financial services. So even the vendors, you need to go back and interrogate your vendors. And there are simple forms where you can do this so that you have the audit trail, you've done the compliance, you've put it through a safety and ethical lens, and now you're done. You've ticked the box, but it has to be done. So the Central Bank of Ireland, this is really important. So this basically, the Consumer Protection Code, and I had seen some maybe representatives from the CBI maybe on this call today. If you are, please feel free to maybe just either put something in the chat or, see if there's anything you'd like to volunteer, because this is moving so quickly. But that came into effect on March 24th, 2026, which is less than a month ago. So the CBI last year has been formally designated as the National Competent Authority for enforcement of the EU AI Act within the financial services sector. So they're looking at explainability, they're looking at algorithmic bias. They see bias as direct breach of the duty to act in the consumer's best interest, and digital shadowing. Digital service delivery must not exploit behavioural biases or nudge consumers into poor financial decisions. So the bottom line here is this is in force now. Okay, so they're looking at governance, they're looking at model oversight, and they're looking at the EU AI Act alignment. So although the EU AI Act may have pushed that high-risk systems down the line, the CBI enforcement has been in place since March. So if you're running high-risk systems, and we've talked about what they are, and we've looked at your obligations, those obligations need to be there now. So all of that element that I said, literacy, robust stress testing, governance, monitoring models, checking for drift, all of that. And the penalties and the stakes are quite high now, and it is worth looking at what these mean, and getting your governance right. So the literacy is, I think, a great place. If you're early on in your AI transformation, this is a great place to start. A lot of people, the start of their AI transformation is they've given Microsoft Copilot licenses to maybe 20% of the company. But have those people been trained in how to use those Microsoft Copilot licenses? And what about all the other people who don't have Microsoft Copilot license and are not allowed access to them? I can guarantee you they are using free AI models, and potentially putting sensitive data. Unless your staff are trained in AI literacy, they are using, many of them, AI in a very potentially dangerous way and putting the organisation at risk. This is the EU AI Act definition of literacy. All organisations deploying or developing AI must ensure staff have sufficient literacy. This is not optional. Enforcement is coming in August. I would argue, though, what AI literacy will do, it will supercharge your organisation, because you're not just going to teach people how to use these models responsibly. You're also going to teach them how to use them at all. So many people are handed Copilot and they're not given any proper training in how to use it. And it's like giving rockets to cave people. You don't know what you don't know. So this literacy training is a fantastic opportunity to start getting your organization to start that AI transformation. So the literacy definition, as you can see there, is quite broad. So at ThoughtFox, we have come up with our own definition of AI literacy, because we believe this actually, it means it's not just a compliance tick box. It actually means that there's capability, because the whole point of AI literacy, it needs to be role appropriate. AI literacy for an architect is different to AI literacy for someone in financial services. And there's no point giving a one size fits all literacy training if it's not role appropriate. But people need to know how to use AI safely, critically, and accountably, understanding enough about how it works to use it well, judge its outputs honestly, and take responsibility for decisions made with its assistance. So this definition, we believe, and we've seen it, it means boards can interrogate AI strategy, managers can identify risk, and frontline teams can use AI tools productively. Because there needs to be a tiered approach to AI literacy. AI literacy at board and senior leadership level is different to all staff. And here I've given an idea of what that tiered approach looks like. And you can see where compliance and risk officers come in that. AI risk assessment, regulatory mapping, EU AI Act and CBI compliance, model validation oversight, AI audit trails, and bias monitoring. They would be your responsibilities. And talking about responsibilities, you're all probably familiar with the RACI matrix. Who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. And I've just given you this table to see where all of that stands. And you can see the different areas of governance and compliance when it comes to AI strategy and vision, AI risk assessment, compliance, governance, data governance, literacy and training, shadow AI monitoring, and incident response and reporting, and all the different areas there. So who should be responsible, who should be accountable, who should be consulted, and who should be informed? Because as I'll get to shortly, AI is very much a human transformation. It's also an organization-wide transformation. One of the reasons why a lot of AI initiatives are failing is that they are being stuck in IT and compliance. They're not getting beyond, but you need to have a lot of people in the room when it comes to AI transformation. I'll talk about that now. Coleman reminded me of this because he attended a Trinity College lecture I gave last year. If you remember anything from this webinar, remember this, and say it to your teams and anyone who's working with AI. CEO, check, edit, own. It is the best acronym you can use for any form of AI, and this is at any level. So check your AI outputs against known facts and data. Never take AI-generated content at face value. Verify sources, cross-reference claims, and validate against your domain expertise. This is one problem with the lack of AI literacy. These AI models are captivating. They are utterly enchanting, and we think they're magic. They're not. They're trained on data, and sometimes that data will get things wrong. And if you are not an expert in that area, you cannot see it. And if you have not trained your teams to actually interrogate these outputs, well, then you're putting the organization at risk. Then you edit these for fairness, accuracy, you review for bias, you ensure balanced representation, check that outputs meet regulatory standards, apply your professional judgment before any output reaches a customer or a regulator, and own it. Own the responsibility for the results. You cannot delegate accountability to an algorithm. If an AI makes a decision, the human who approved it bears the responsibility. Remember, this is the best intern you've ever had. Would you let an intern present to a board without checking what it said? You own it. You cannot, and the CBI is very clear on this, you cannot say the computer made a mistake. You need to own the output. So I just have a few minutes left just to talk about what this transformation means. So we've gone through an awful lot of information there on what governance looks like, what AI looks like, what the risks are, how you create that ecosystem, how you start building it. But AI transformation, I really want to kind of make sure that you understand this, is much bigger than just a governance and compliance. Now, it is governance and compliance is a massive part, and AI transformation needs to start with that. If it doesn't start with that, it can be a disaster, and it's very difficult to kind of try and bolt on governance and compliance to AI transformation once it's gone down the road, and quite often it can be quite expensive as well. Plus, you're putting your organization at risk if you go hell-bent on AI transformation without any governance and compliance guardrails. So 70% of AI projects fail. Now, a lot of people see this and go, well, why bother? And I'm sure there's some of you on this call going, AI is going to make my life so difficult. This is a nightmare. And I'm sure there's some of you as well, understandably as well, looking at things like the AI bubble and the hype in the stock markets. And there is a hype, there's no question. There is a bubble. I think there is an AI bubble. However, I will say this. There was a dot-com crash, as some of you may be old enough to remember, about 25 years ago. And those dot-com stocks were certainly overpriced. But remember, the internet went nowhere. Same with AI. If anything, I think there is AI hype. I think it is overvalued, but I don't think the technology is overvalued. I don't think there's hype around what the capability of the technology is. So the bottom line here is it is really important that you even begin your AI transformation, because if you don't, you will be left behind. We may have conflicted feelings about the ethics of that, but AI isn't going anywhere. So without guidance, and I'm sure some of you are seeing this, there's scattered pilots that never scale, there's no governance framework, unclear return on investment and wasted investment, and regulatory exposure and compliance gaps. But with a structured approach, if you bring in clear governance from day one, you measure the outcomes and the return on investment tracking, you build in EU AI Act and CBI compliance, and you build in the internal capability, well, then you are seeing extraordinary AI results. So there's this thing, and if you want to check out our website, called the AI chasm, where people find it very hard to get from here to here. And it's all because of how AI is implemented from the beginning. So as I said, AI transformation is a human transformation. 70% of the challenge is people and processes. Only 30% is technology. The organizations that succeed are the ones that invest in their people first, building confidence and understanding and capability across every level. I was talking to one of my colleagues in Trinity about this a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Ashish Kumar Jha, who lectures on AI leadership training in Trinity, and he was saying something really interesting. In a couple of years, everybody will have AI. AI, by the way, is like electricity. It's not an area of our lives that it's not going to touch. And everybody will have AI. At the moment, if you get ahead now, you will be ahead of your competitors in AI. But in a few years, that will have all leveled out, and everybody will have access and understand how to use these tools. So what sets you apart from your competitors? Your people. Your people will set you apart from your competitors. So it's not always just about the AI, it's how you upskill, how you look at how AI is transforming organizations. If you start doing that now, you will be ahead. So in ThoughtFox, we bring clients through 7 dimensions of AI maturity, and we give people a maturity assessment. And these are the dimensions that we have identified. This is our intellectual property. We've put a huge amount of work into this. ThoughtFox, I'm one of the members of ThoughtFox. There's just 5 of us at the moment. We are all AI builders. We all use AI, we all implemented AI in other organizations. So we're all, like I said, I run an AI engineering team. So unlike a lot of other consultancies, we are actually, we've got skin in the game. We've had boots on the ground. So leadership and vision, that is actually the single biggest success factor in AI transformation. Successive studies have shown this. If leadership is bought in, if it will, the odds of it succeeding go right up. If leadership isn't bought in, it will simply not succeed. Strategic alignment, all initiatives connected to core business goals and competitive priorities. And for many years, AI was almost a solution in search of a problem. So what are your core business goals, and can AI help you get there? Governance and ethics, which we've spoken about. Obviously, that's what this webinar is about. Technological capability and data strategy, obviously. People, culture, and skills. So AI literacy, fluency, change management, and organizational learning. AI is change management on steroids. So there's a lot of people in organizations very nervous about it. How do you communicate honestly, transparently, and how do you turn that fear and overwhelm into curiosity and excitement? And that's something we can really help with. And it's really gratifying, actually, seeing people who initially were very suspicious and nervous, and suddenly I've seen people do 180s going, this is incredible. I can see how it's going to help me, and now I can get this time back. I'm giving a talk soon for Rethink Ireland, which is in the community and voluntary and sector. And one of the areas there is burnout. So how AI can help them, focus on the really important things. And that's what AI can do for all of us. Operating models and processes. This is something that's quite unique to ThoughtFox, and it's something we feel really strongly about. Interrogate your operating models before you bolt an AI solution onto it. Some of these models are not fit for purpose, and they're just there because they've always been there. And then finally, value realization. Metrics, metrics, metrics. Measure all the time. What's your baseline? What did you start with before AI? How long did it take to do this task? What's it doing now? What are your KPIs? If you don't measure it, how can you measure how AI is changing in your organization? So these are our AI maturity levels, level 0 to 5. You can see the different levels. Now, what's really interesting, most companies, and we've gone into big companies, manufacturing companies, tech companies, all kinds of financial services companies, most companies are in Ireland, and not just Ireland, frankly, in the world, are between 0 and 2. Very few have gotten to 3 yet. Very, very few. So a lot of people are in the unaware phase, people experimenting, and that's your shadow AI world straight away. Exploring, more and more people are moving into that, but it's still scattered, no proper governance. And 2 is really ideally where you need to get to fairly quickly, where AI is formalized at an organizational level, at a board level, governance is built in. That's really where you need to be. But what's really interesting is a lot of financial services companies are still at 1, but the EU AI Act and certainly the CBI is demanding that you move to 3 fairly quickly to be in adherence and compliance to the laws that are already now in force. So the gap between 1 and 3 is where most compliance risk sits today, and we've gone through all that. The EU AI Act does demands defined governance immediately for high-risk systems, and so does the CBI. The explainability, the oversight, the data monitoring, the model monitoring, all of that needs to be in place now. So at ThoughtFox, and I'd be delighted if any of you wanted to reach out to me to discuss how we might be able to help you with AI transformation. We take people through the 5 A's. We have this system called Elevate. So assess, align, activate, accelerate, and amplify. So we start literally, with a few workshops, helping you understand where you are. And then we work with you to help literally build you up and get you to amplify. And like I said, very few companies are at amplify, but we have a program which takes anywhere between 18 months and 2 years for organizations to get to amplify. And that can be done in stages and as quickly or as cautiously as you need to go. So finally, before I go to questions, the role of the compliance officer is certainly not being replaced. You can see the risks are now really quite substantial, but it's being elevated to AI orchestrator. And I believe, I'm preparing for this webinar today, that you are all uniquely positioned to lead your organization's AI transformation. You understand risk, you understand governance, and you understand regulatory compliance and the exact capabilities that AI adoption demands. The question isn't whether AI will reshape financial services, because as we've seen, it already is. It is whether you will be the one shaping how it happens. So thank you all very much. I'm going to stop. As Fiona said, all of these slides will be available to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hand back over to Coleman.
Thank you very much, Marie. Bang on time, as you said you would be. Fair play. So look, there's plenty of detail there to distill and digest. I've got a ton of questions coming in, so we're just not going to get to them all, but we will get to some of the ones that went in beforehand and some that came in during the session, if that's all right, Marie. One of the questions that came in, and one that we actually discussed, was how do you see the EU's gradual shift towards deregulation, and that could be wider than the EU, impacting the AI Act and more specifically the ethical use of AI moving forward?
Yes, and thank you, whoever sent that question in advance. I actually tried to incorporate the answer into the webinar so you can see where we are with the EU AI Act. And we're in such a state of flux, and the AI, there was a committee that decided the high risk systems are being put back, that regulation. So it's not really deregulation as such. What I would, and I hope that everybody has gotten from this webinar, is I would point you to the Central Bank of Ireland, actually, in this instant, Coleman. Those high risk systems, if you are using high risk systems, those obligations are actually now in force. And maybe that's a conversation that needs to be had between you and the CBI to see exactly where you sit in that. But that regulation is now in force, basically, if you're using high risk systems.
Okay. We've another one in here. What differences are there in the expectations of compliance teams when utilizing AI versus a second line of defense oversight role of business processes? Does the speaker have any tips for navigating this?
I think that was a really good question, and thanks again for sending it in advance. And I hope maybe the webinar helped give you that, because you're so right. There's two things going on here. You are a user of AI, but you're also in charge of how it's being used. So, I mean, back to you being a user of AI. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but I really would come back to that whole CEO acronym again. If you can apply that in terms of your own use of AI, I do it every single day. A real tip I would have for you is how you use AI to interrogate its own outputs. So that's why having two large language models, if possible, would really benefit. So if you're a practitioner of AI, if you're using AI to help you research or whatever, so first of all, it'll give you a load of research. You can actually give it a persona and ask it to interrogate itself as a compliance officer. And quite often it'll catch itself. It'll come back. It has no agenda. And then what I do is I take that and I put it into another LLM, maybe Gemini, and I get it to interrogate that. So you're giving kind of three areas. And when the information coming back and it's consistent, then you're going to be okay. So at the CEO, but then in terms of, look, as a compliance and risk officer, and you saw what people are accountable and responsible for, there's a lot. The biggest thing I would start with is AI literacy. I would genuinely start with AI literacy. That is you are legally obliged to provide it. It is a great starting point for organizations' AI transformation. But now you've got to start building your AI ecosystem. And again, we go into organizations and help them do that. Even before you appoint anyone like a chief AI officer, this doesn't necessarily involve running out and hiring a load of people, because you will ultimately have to hire people. Of course you will. But there's a lot you can do. You can set up a governance committee. You can nominate a chief AI governance supervisor. You can definitely, I would, and I mean, obviously I have a vested interest here, but you will need some expertise and help in helping you set up. But the whole point of what we do is we're interested in helping people how to fish. We show them how to set these things up and then they run them. That's the important thing. So there's two things going on. There's your own use of AI, and then there's the whole oversight that you now have to, and you really need to get to grips with your shadow AI world as well, and be very clear-sighted about it, and don't be in denial about it, because that's happening.
Well, there's a number of questions linked to that, but one that I'll ask is, and I know the Compliance Institute are working on a solution here, and I know you have a solution, is how best to upskill? Like, what can people do today to upskill in terms of the literacy piece and so on?
Yeah, very good question. By the way, a really basic thing here, and I get this asked this all the time, is I cannot stress the importance of using enterprise grade AI tools. The free versions are great, but the deal is if you put data into a free version of an AI model like ChatGPT or any of the others, the deal is that data goes back to train the model. If you're paying for it, it doesn't, and you can secure it, and you can be much have far more oversight on it. AI literacy is a strange one, and I deliberately gave our own definition. You can go online now and you can see AI literacy courses. Some of them are 2.5 hours, some of them are like a week long. And the EU has been very, very vague, frankly, in what AI literacy is. I would come back to the definition I gave you. I think it really does need to be role specific. And back to your point about upskilling, Coleman, it is not that difficult to create bespoke AI literacy courses, to start the transformation by going, well, what do we actually need? Check out what Microsoft, let's say you're a Microsoft customer and there's Copilot training. Go back and interrogate Microsoft. Does that tick the box for AI literacy training? Perhaps it does. I need to be more, you need to check this out. But, the more role specific and the more bespoke your AI literacy training is, and the more tiered approach you have, what you're building there, and this is really important actually, is you're not just building literacy and you're not just ticking a box. What you're building, which will really power your organization, is fluency. That's AI fluency, where you are really comfortable, you're totally solid, and you are using these models in an incredibly productive way, and your organization will go like that.
And I guess, particularly when you get to that fluency stage, one question I have in here is the word that I missed or I didn't hear was the word values. In assessing the use or application of AI, how or by whom are the values assessed and measured?
Very good question, and thank you for it. And I actually, you're absolutely right. One of the things that we do with organizations, and it's a really interesting exercise, is we work with the organization's existing values to see what that means for AI. So, some organizations are very adamant if you have values like ambition and your workforce is very important to you, what steps are you taking to ensure that does AI replace people? Is this important to you? So a lovely exercise that we do with organizations is most organizations and values, they have put huge amounts of time and effort into those values. And so you look at how AI is going to impact those specific values and you map your AI strategy and policy use specifically to what is important to you as an organization.
Okay. And again, sorry, I'm a little bit disjointed here, but there's some good questions coming in. Another one is, how does a firm navigate the client question, i.e., should a firm ask clients to confirm they're not using AI when they're making applications or filling in proposal forms and so on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Look, the thing about AI is, and I have interesting kind of feelings on this, as you've probably seen, letting AI just run right. AI is an incredible look. I use AI every day in everything I do. As a ThoughtFox, we're an AI transformation organization. So we are kind of at the amplify stage, and I've been building AI since 2021. And I use AI to help me to do nearly every task. Although there is interesting research, by the way, and it's something I'm very conscious of, whereby cognitive there people critical thinking is in decline, and if we're not careful and we don't, our brains are like any other muscle. We may be looking at a future where we have to go to gyms to exercise our minds because AI has done so much, and you do need to keep using it. So AI can be an incredible tool to help you create documents or help you even it's extraordinary at helping you write tenders. For any of you who are involved in tenders, I mean, it's absolutely amazing. But what I do then is I interrogate AI. I go back, I CEO it, I look at it, I realize that's not reading well, that needs to change. That does. So if I submit that to an organization and this is actually me as well. It's not just the AI. And don't forget the extraordinary thing about using enterprise tools, we're using Claude, is Claude is then trained in your organization's brand, tone of voice. It's got everything at its disposal. And it's you don't have to keep going and adding things to it.
Yeah.
That's what these enterprise grade tools are so amazing. So do you say, yes, I used a little bit of, Gemini there, and I used a little bit of AI to do this. I mean, when you're actually, what's happening now, of course, and I work with Microsoft because we built our own model on Azure, and this is a fascinating example of literacy and lack of it. So many people are using AI to write CVs, and it's quite extraordinary about writing CVs if you've ever tried it. The problem is it makes you sound like the Queen of Ireland. Like, it's very sycophantic, and it really gives you skills and attributes that are probably overblown. And you need to go back and go, no, I'm not as good at that as it says I am. I need to pull that right back now. But of course, what a lot of people are doing are not doing that. Not only are they not doing that, they're not even reading the outputs. Because at the very end, the way AI always wants you to engage with it, it's like Netflix. Would you like me to put this into a slide deck? Would you like me to put this into a PDF? Microsoft are getting CVs from interns where that's left on the end. They haven't read the CV back. Okay. So this is a classic literacy problem. So when it comes to AI, thinking that people are submitting things with AI without human intervention is naive. It's just, if it seems authentic and someone has checked it and made sure they're in it, that's up to you. But saying you're not allowed to use AI for any of this is, I would argue, organizations now actually need to be encouraging people to use these models in a safe, ethical way, not saying no.
Yeah, and I think that's a good note to finish on. I can almost hear the weighted footsteps of people going back to their desk with stacks of notes, Marie. So look, on behalf of the Ethics Committee and the Compliance Institute, we're privileged to have you today and very grateful for your time. Thank you very much, Marie. Fiona, I'll just hand back to you very quickly, if that's okay.
Yeah, so again, to repeat, Coleman, thank you so much, Emery, for joining us, and for Coleman for some great moderation there. So just to follow up on the upskilling part, due to the volume of people that joined the call today and the volume of questions coming through, we do have an AI governance short course starting on the 21st of May. So there will be an email sent out to members tomorrow, and it will be available on our website. So I'll close out just to remind everybody, the CPD code is 2026-1124, and that, along with a copy of the slides, will be available. So thank you, Marie, thank you, Coleman, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's the best way to get in touch. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.